Hi, everybody. Just waiting to see if everybody's in. Who all I've got here. Okay, I got Jeanette, I got Bree. Bree, it looks like you're in your new digs. It's exciting.
We're getting there.
Wow, that's awesome. I'm going to come visit you when I can.
Hopefully we'll have all the paint done by then.
Well, we'll see when I come visit you anyway. Am I seeing Glenna? I'm not seeing Glenna. Sorry, folks, I'm just taking attendance. What are we doing? Okay. Okay. So we might have a couple join us. I think we're just missing a few. So first of all, welcome everybody. Today is Veterans Day, as you I'm sure know. But I just want to say how grateful I am for the service of so many to our country. Both my dad and all my uncles served in the Army, and as well as other relatives who have served in the military and are serving now. And I saw on Facebook, of course I saw on Facebook, we don't know them all, but we owe them all. And that's really a great sentiment. So thank a veteran today or every day, if you have the chance. So, okay, so our author today, I'm so excited. Amy Haimerl's with us today, and she is the author of Detroit Hustle, a memoir of love, life, and home. And I'm just going to give you a little info about Amy, and then I'm going to just paraphrase a little bit from the inside of the book, and then we'll get started. But I also want to say, if you have questions for Amy, feel free to unmute. This is very casual, small group. Any question is a great question, as you all know, unless you're working the circ desk. But the chat, you can post things in the chat if you'd like as well. So just feel free to participate. So Amy's a professor of journalism at MSU and covers small business and urban policy for Fortune, Reuters, and the New York Times. She has a background in enterprise and investigative reporting and was the entrepreneurship editor at Crain's Detroit Business, where she covered the city's historic bankruptcy trial, which began in 2013 and plays kind of prominently in her book. She's an alumni of Fortune Small Business, CNNMoney, and USAA magazine, as well as a former Knight-Wallace Fellow at the University of Michigan. So she's a little MSU, a little U of M. And here's a quote that I found from Amy. I'm not sure where I found it, but my bread and butter is covering small business in the country's greatest city for innovation, entrepreneurship, and community building. I come prepared with my own pair of Carhartt bibs, every grease stain earned in service to my father's small excavating company. I also know a fair amount about urban renewal and rural poverty. So from the inside cover of her book, journalist Amy Haimerl and her husband have been priced out of their Brooklyn neighborhood. Seeing this as a great opportunity to start over again, they decide to cash in their savings and buy an abandoned house for $35,000 in Detroit, the largest city in the U.S. to declare bankruptcy. As she and her husband restore the 1914 Georgian Revival, a stately brick house with no plumbing, no heat, no electricity, Amy finds a community of Detroiters who, like herself, aren't afraid of a little hard work or things that are a little rough around the edges. Filled with amusing and touching anecdotes about navigating a real estate market that is rife with scams, finding a contractor who is a lover of C.S. Lewis and willing to quote him liberally, and neighbors who either get teary-eyed at the sight of newcomers or urge Amy and her husband to get out while they can. Amy writes evocatively about the charms and challenges of finding her footing in a city whose future is in question. Detroit Hustle is a memoir that is both a meditation on what it takes to make a house a home and a love letter to a much derided city. So welcome, Amy. Glad you're here with us today. And for those of you who, I think I said this before, I found Amy because I listened to Jeff Milo's podcast, A Little Too Quiet. And Jeff had been with us earlier in this, in our annual meeting, virtual annual meeting. And I was really lucky that I tuned in to that one because it really was an awesome interview. And so then I just reached out to Amy and said, hey, would you consider talking about your book? And she's like, great, yeah, sure. Let me know when. So here she is. And although she said, when I asked her about date, she said, I really don't want to do the day after the election. That's probably not good. But here we are, a week later. I don't know if it's any better. So, but anyhow. So I guess I'll just start by asking a few questions, Amy, and then just feel free to chat.
Good.
Talk about things. So how is it writing a book since you're used to writing shorter pieces for magazines? I mean, obviously it's more personal, but did you come at it from a different angle or a different frame of mind?
That's a great question. And I would say that, you know, I didn't know what I was getting into when I decided I wanted to write a book. So I was doing the Knight-Wallace Fellowship at the University of Michigan, which is basically a mid-career program for mid-career journalists. They take a dozen journalists a year, let us spend a year at the university and traveling and sort of going deeper on subject matter that matters to us as a way to like get journalists out of the day-to-day grind of having to like just cover everything and be able to get smarter about the topics we're passionate about. I was coming out of that and didn't know what to do next. My husband and I were considering staying in Detroit. I had a job offer in Oakland, California. And while we were figuring that out, I started a blog just about what we were doing, and people were sort of interested in this house we were thinking about. And that sort of segued into, well, maybe this should become a book because there was such interest in it. But as always in my life, if there's an easy way and a hard way, I'm probably going to take the hard way. And so I have no idea how to write a book. Nobody in my family has ever written a book. I'm the only one in my family to ever go to college. And I was like, okay, so I went to the library and I found a resource on how to write a book proposal. And then I took a class and I wrote a book proposal. And when the publisher that eventually bought it agreed, they said, but can you write it in 90 days? And I was like, sure, back to the library. Is there a book on how to write a book in 90 days? I didn't even know what I didn't know. So it seemed like, sure, I grew up in a small business household where you just kind of do what's got to get done. And I said, sure, I can do that. So my best friend, who's actually here visiting from New York right now, said to me after my book came out, I didn't know if you could actually write. So I was pleasantly surprised to discover that you're actually a writer, not just a reporter. So I would say that what is different in writing a book than being a journalist that I struggled with at first is my journalism work. I do my interviews. I sit down and I write the story. I know the lead. I basically know how it's going to unfold. Usually I do a lot of work on small business for the New York Times. Lead anecdote, what we call a nut graph, which is like what that anecdote represents or stands for, what the story is going to be. And then usually 2 or 3 examples looking at the issue from a couple facets. Pretty easy. But it's very linear, and book writing I discovered was not linear. So I would write it like the first draft of the book. When I put together the book proposal, like you have to give them a sample chapter or 2. And I was like, okay, now I've written the first 2 chapters. Those first two chapters are not the first 2 chapters in the book. They're all torn apart. And so that I had to teach myself, and I'm still teaching myself and learning how to write in scenes as opposed to writing in like narrative, how to do those 2 things together. So I'd say that's the big difference. And I don't have any classic training. My degree is in journalism and economics. I didn't take advanced English classes. I don't have an MFA. I've never taken how to study the English language or write fiction or nonfiction. So it was a learning curve on my own.
Okay. I muted and I'm like trying to unmute. Can't. Okay.
I feel like that's going to be like the joke in like 10 years. We're all going to be like, instead of like, can you hear me? We're going to be like, mute or unmute.
Absolutely. You mentioned a little bit about your upbringing, but you were brought up in the rural West. And it may have prepared you or maybe molded you for the interesting life that you've led so far. Do you want to share a little bit about your upbringing with us?
Sure. So I grew up in Fruita, Colorado, which is a town of less than 1,000 people, basically at the Colorado-Utah border. My mother calls it the lunar landscape. She did not like it there. But, you know, that is where I spent my formative years. We moved to Denver for work. So the area of the country that I grew up in the 80s had a massive economic bust. Exxon was coming and was going to be mining oil shale there, and overnight pulled out and dropped the entire region into about 80% unemployment. So I grew up with a dad who, you know, didn't have a job for 5 years. Nobody I knew's dad had a job. And I do mean dad because most moms stayed home with kids especially at that point in time. And, you know, when we moved, it was because my dad had to be able to find work. We moved with $300 to our names, moved to Arvada, Colorado, and a job. And when we got there, the job didn't exist anymore. So my father had to figure out a way to feed his family. And he's a man who, again, will always do what has to be done. So he's a man who's mined uranium. He's fought coal fires inside of mountains. He's been a long haul trucker, and then eventually started his own excavating business. And so I grew up in a small business household, doing the books with my dad. My brother's 10 years younger than me, and he's worked for the company. So my brother was running dynamite at 9. And it's just, I don't have what I've come to learn. I don't have what is a traditional upbringing. My father is also not my biological father. My mother married him when I was 5, but to me, he is my father. He adopted me. He says he married my mother so he could get me. He and I are very, very close. And that, I think that his influence on me definitely primed me for, you know, being adventurous. You know, he's, like I said, I'm the only one in my family to go to college, and he's a man where women in his realm stayed in the house. They raised the kids, you know, ran the home. And here he has a daughter where he's got me in the truck with him. He's got me in the mine with him. He's got me at the auctions with him. Like, his daughter could do, and, you know, anything she wanted to do. And he was going to encourage that. You're going to go to college. You're going to do whatever you want. And I think having that constantly as a level of support is what allowed me to sort of, even though he couldn't see how I could get there, he knew I could, and he was gonna make that happen. So getting from a very small town where, for most people in my cohort at that time, our best hopes were like babies and work at the city market, to, you know, working at Fortune and the New York Times, you know, and living in New York and now Detroit. Like, that's a pretty big gap. And I would say it's both my father and that ruralness that I came from, of having to be scrappy and figure it out, that helped propel me.
The grit, I mean, you just have, and you're talking to librarians here who, as I mentioned before we started the meeting, are in small rural communities for sure. And they live that too. I mean, the people who live there, and they will just always stay there, and kids maybe who don't have the support or people in their lives that might give them vision to say, you can do other things. You know, why don't you leave for a while if you can? If you want to come back, great, come back. But go see what else is out there. And I think some people are pushed to that because they don't have any other option. But some people, it's just too frightening. It's a frightening thing, you know.
My mother says she would never do such a thing. And yet I'm like, hey mom, you grew up in the suburbs of Denver, fell in love with like the man who took you on his first date on a camping trip up in the mountain and decided to like tear apart his engine on a pass. Like, and then you married him. Like, you have grit. Like, and then you moved to, you know, the other side of the state to be with him. I was like, mom, you have grit too. And she doesn't see it. But, yeah, you know, and I think different rural communities can be very different. Some are like where I grew up, and some are more affluent. Some of the only work for people where I was growing up was, it's going to be oil and mining, oil and gas. It was going to be ag. And then for women, like my mom, she was a seamstress. And so she sewed shirts for a very high-end shop in Aspen, you know, wealthy celebrity community in the mountains. but we weren't allowed to go in through the front door. So I remember that very vividly as a child, that, you know, the help doesn't go through the front door. Which, you know, will in some ways tie into my book, because one of the legitimate criticisms about my book, and I think I did really well with my book, but I've got 4 years on, so I can reflect on it maybe in a different, with some distance, is that, oh, it's called Detroit Hustle, but you had contractors. That's not hustling. And I would say there's a lot of different type of hustle. But for me, the kid who was always the help, who couldn't go in the front door, to have gotten to a place in her life where she would be able to hire a contractor and collaborate and work together, it turned out to be a really big deal, not just to be me, but to my dad. That my dad, because, you know, he was always the one, we got hired, we showed up, we were the ones who everybody wanted to, you know, make sure wasn't seen. I mean, even in excavating, like, you know, you have a problem, you know, people have a problem with their, you know, they have to call a contractor, they want them in the emergency, but they make sure to get them out as fast as possible. They don't want to see them. Sure. And so now I'm in the position to hire and look at it differently. So it was an interesting sort of getting out of small rural America, but also still be really attached and defensive of small rural America at the same time. My family's all in Hamilton, Montana now. So my father's side homesteaded Montana, and my mother's side homesteaded Colorado.
It's in you. I mean, it's
yeah,
not, you know, it's part of you. That is part of your journey. I mean, it's in you. So you talk about your dad and your mom so lovingly. And obviously these folks played a huge part of your life, a great impact. And there are other mentors in your life and that played a big part in influencing your life decisions. And in fact, one of them was Donna Ladd.
Yes.
Would you tell us a little bit about Donna and how she helped you get to that next step?
Sure. So Donna, I met Donna when I was in college. So she was about 10 years older than me, and she was an instructor in one of the classes. And she and I really hit it off, and she kind of took me under her wing and didn't just teach me journalism in class, but took me on as her intern, she was a mentor to me, taught me how to freelance, and helped me get my first job. So I graduated on a Sunday, and on Monday morning, I was the editor-in-chief of 2 newspapers. I had no idea how to put out a paper, but by golly, we'll get it done. And Friday, a paper came out. It may not have been the best paper ever, but an actual physical paper came out. And at that point in time, it was still dial-up. This was like 1999. So my publisher and I would have to share a dial-up connection. So if I needed to get online, I would have to call him and be like, can you please get offline? I need to go online so I can get the gas prices for the front page. But so Donna helped me get that job. And then she grew up in rural Mississippi. So we had a lot in common. Her mom was illiterate. So Donna was the first person in her family to go to college as well. Donna learned to read and was the one who had to do the bills and a lot of the things for her mama. You know, she remembers very vividly, you know, being drug around on a cotton sack through the fields when her mom was working when she was a kid. So there was even though there was distance in region and distance in age, there was a lot of commonality between us. So she decided to go to New York because she got into Columbia and she wanted to go get her master's degree. And I decided to follow her and got a job in New York. So, you know, that's when I first got, you know, working in business and economic reporting there. Did that for a couple of years while I also did celebrity reporting. So for a little while, I was a celebrity wrangler for a high-end luxury magazine. We would always joke, do the rich people know a girl who grew up in a trailer is telling them what they should buy? But I, you know, interviewed Anne Hathaway and Molly Sims, and it was Donald Trump was actually one of my writers. He wrote our real estate column. So for one summer, I edited Not Yet President Trump, and I edited Spike Lee, and Paris Hilton was my intern. So that was a crazy summer. Paris wouldn't actually speak to me. She only flounced into the office every, you know, couple of weeks, and then she would go to lunch with the publisher. But technically she was my intern, even though she wouldn't look at me. But through that, yeah, Donna and I stayed really close. And so when 9/11 happened, you know, one of the big fallouts was in the media industry, and it almost immediately seized up all of the advertising dollars. So if you're a company looking at advertising, what is not needed anymore is probably luxury advertising in a luxury magazine. You know, even, you know, Vogue, you know, suffered, Vanity Fair, Fortune, everybody suffered. A lot of magazines started shutting down. So all of a sudden, entire New York is flooded with out of work journalists. You couldn't even get a job bartending or waitressing because everybody else was trying to get those jobs. So I was, collecting on my unemployment, trying to figure out what to do. My unemployment was $1,200 a month. My rent was $1,400 a month for my studio, and which I had to borrow the first couple of months from my 26. So like my 16-year-old brother loaned me the money because he's always been better with money than I am. I'm like, if I have it, I give it. He's like more financially wise. You should listen to him, not me, about money. But so he loaned it to me. I'm getting that. And Donna has finished up her graduate program and has decided to go back home to Mississippi to work on the final part of her dissertation. And she says, why don't you just come down here with us? We've got a ton of room. There's an extra bedroom. You can just stay down here while you figure it out. So I don't know. So I went down for a weekend. I took the train down to Mississippi and decided to stay. And so instead of like suffering in New York where I couldn't pay my rent, we took my $1,200 a month unemployment and used that to start a newspaper called the Jackson Free Press, which continues to operate. It's a civil rights newspaper that has been known for getting old Klansmen jailed, really, getting, mayors, taken down. Like, it's an investigative newspaper. She's on, Rachel Maddow's show a lot, and has recently just launched a second newspaper, the Mississippi Free Press, covering solutions journalism in Mississippi. So I'm really proud of that work and what she's done. And I helped her. I wrote the original business plan and helped her start that, and have continued to be involved. And so she helped me get where I was, and then it turned out I was in a place with, thanks to unemployment, to help finance where she was going and continue to build that. And it's something I'm really proud of.
Awesome. That's amazing. I love the whole story too about how, you're a journalism major, but you took an economics class and did like really well, loved it, which I can't stand economics. But then I also find it funny, you did really well at that. But again, your brother is the one that maybe has a little bit more of the money, is more savvy with money, and you borrow from him. So I very...
For a while, I was the personal finance columnist at CNNMoney. I edited the personal finance team. So that's real estate, taxes, investing, all of those things. And the joke was always like, definitely do as I say and never as I do, which would come into play when we buy the house. And everybody is like, you can't buy a house in Detroit. Like, that's crazy financial. And I'm like, well, that's probably totally means that I'm going to do that. Like, that's definitely going to be the thing I'll pick.
Cracks me up. Just think that's hilarious. Okay, so the title of your book, you mentioned it a little bit, Detroit Hustle. But I found when I first started the book, it's early on in the book, there's a quote from your dad, and it says, "You have to hustle, kid. Always hustle harder than anyone else." And, I think sometimes we all have sayings, or, our parents will say something, or there's somebody in our life that says something, and it just always is with us. And for you, that seems to be, it is with you all the time. You've always had to hustle. You've always had to try to figure it out. And then a little bit later on that page, it says, you talk about how the unofficial motto of your adopted city is Detroit hustles harder. Everybody has a main hustle, a side hustle, a creative hustle, whatever it takes to get by. So talk to us about the title of your book and how you really brought in, your past, but then what was going to be your future in Detroit.
So the title's interesting. So one of the things that I learned in book publishing, as a first-time author, again, you don't know what you don't know. You don't know what you can and can't do. You have an agent, and so your agent is supposed to be your representative and help you with things. And I had wanted to name it Detroit Hustle from the get-go. But I was, wanting something a little bit maybe more flashy. So my initial proposed title was, Detroit Hustle, Memoir of Life in, a bankrupt city, right? The Memoir of Love, Life, and Home, every time I read that, just makes me want to stab my eyeball out. I hate it deeply, but I lost that war. So there are things your publisher does, and they felt like they market tested it, and that what I wanted was going to be too scary and readers wouldn't like it. And I would say that, my book did well enough, but I also don't think it was quite clear about what it was. And so you get some readers who come to it thinking it's just going to be a home renovation, like HGTV story, and it's not that. it's, you know, something more, but you don't know that that's there based on the title and some of the cover language. So I think it never quite hit with the market. And I think one of the things, kind of going back to your first question, that was a difference between journalism and writing a book, is you really need to understand what your themes are and sort of what the bigger picture that it all adds up to it, right? It's not just a series of plot points and just not a TikTok. And I didn't quite understand that. And I think when I was writing it, again, they gave me 90 days. I didn't know what my themes were, right? So my book is strongest probably when I'm reflecting in the past, because I'd had a lifetime to reflect on that. The stuff in Detroit is more reportage because it was literally happening at that time. I was like, I don't know what my themes are. I don't know if Detroit gets out of bankruptcy. I don't know if we go bankrupt trying to rehab this house. I don't know. And so with reflection, I was like, oh, I was grappling with, and I deal with it in the book, but I was grappling with really big themes around class and race and gentrification and displacement. And I tried really hard to like frame it so that people understood that even though I was coming from New York, and that was going to give a certain kind of perception of who I am, and people are going to look at me with this nice house in Detroit and they have very strong perceptions of who I am. I tried to write the preface to remind you where I'm from, Colorado. I didn't do this with a trust fund, even though I'm coming from New York. Like, I come from a different kind of background, but that all got lost. And I feel like I tried so hard, and what I should have done is, like, if I'd been able to like give myself permission to take a little longer with the book and not feel like, okay, I finished this program, I've got to do the next thing, or I'm not going to be successful in my career. And like, I was freaking out about what my next point was supposed to be. And I was like, okay, I want this book, and that's the next thing. If I'd given myself a little bit more time, I would have been able to have more time to reflect on what some of that would have been. And I think that what my title would have been of something more like Detroit Hustle, Memoir of a Reluctant Gentrifier. Like, just own it, be it, do it, be ready to have those hard conversations. And like, no, like, I'm going to get blowback in every way, but these are like, I'm coming into a city, even though I come from not a lot of resources and background, coming into a city where having a job gives me an advantage over a lot of other people. So that those are these hard conversations that we have to have in Detroit. And I wish that the title had said, this book is trying to grapple with those. It's not just an HGTV book. Because I think people who wanted the HGTV book are disappointed because they're like, wait, she didn't do it herself. I'm like, no, I did the last house myself, and that was terrible. I had to like shower at the truck stop for months.
Well, okay. So I have like a ton of questions, right? And now I'm like, well, I can't ask that. She just answered that. No, I can't. But I do want to get back to the gentrification comment and about the first house reno. But more towards the end of the book, I think, is really where you talk about how more stores are opening up, and, you know, Sister Pie, and there's just, you know, there's just new people moving in, and when you went to Sister Pie, the opening, it was raining, and you walked in and you knew all these people, but you looked around and everybody was basically white, and it wasn't what you thought. And you throughout the book, you are grappling with this emotional turmoil with gentrification. Mm-hmm. And then you talk about how you felt gentrified when you guys lived in Colorado, and now you feel you're a gentrifier in Detroit. And I think that, especially now in our culture, I mean, I think that really just kind of hit home to me at the end of the book. You know, kind of, you'd say it tied it up, but it really, you can see from both sides your life, and you know, but it was eating you up, and but Ryan, not so much.
But Ryan,
not so much. He just goes with it. He just, yeah. And Ryan is her husband, and he's just more, he is the yin to your yang. I'm just, you know, I mean, we all have that person, and hopefully everybody gets that. But yeah, I just, I don't want to yammer on about that, but you touched on it, and I just wanted to comment on that, how you had mentioned.
My husband, I am definitely blessed with a really great and supportive husband. And he is, I am always sort of very self-aware and critical and thinking about things in a very active way. And my husband is self-aware and thoughtful, but he's he is just naturally more happy and live life the way it is. And we have a lot of fights. Like he comes from a very different class background than I do too, and that plays into some things. And but I am very blessed to have had him on this journey, because touching on, so I talked about the first house. So I had a previous partner who technically I was married to, because Colorado is a 6-month common law state. So we never actually got married, but I had to get divorced when we split up because we had a house we had bought together. My mother at the time when we bought the house told me that if I was serious enough to buy a house with the man, then I should be serious enough to put him on title, even though we weren't married. So even though the mortgage was in my name, he got to be on title. And so when he left me for his friend, after I'd moved to New York to go set up, like I'd gotten a job out there, we were going to move from Colorado to New York, my second time going to New York. I'd been gone 6 weeks. He left me for my friend and then refused to move out of our house. And he was on title, so I couldn't make him because he has all of the rights. And because we'd held ourselves as married and on our taxes and healthcare, I got stuck paying for his health insurance and his cell phone bill and the mortgage, plus all my New York expenses for about 18 months because he wouldn't leave. But he and I had done that house together and we did all the sweat equity. And when we left, one of the challenges was, so I bought that house in Denver. It's one of the cheapest houses in the entire city in 2002 or 2003, bought it for $115,000. We had to completely renovate it. And it's like the shoemaker's children who have no shoes. I was the contractor's partner who had no house. So like for weeks we were showering at the truck stop. My kitchen was like, a door over sawhorses with a little tiny refrigerator that we lived out of forever. Everything was always torn up. And he was going to try to finish it and then join me in New York, but we couldn't sell it and we couldn't get it refinanced. And we had an adjustable rate mortgage, because again, this is at the beginning of the financial crisis. And all of a sudden that arm started going up and up and up. And my affordable mortgage that I could afford on just my salary could no longer do that. Because I think we wound up paying, I think when it topped out, we were close to 13%. And so he wouldn't leave, and everybody's getting foreclosed on in the country. And we're having massive financial turmoil. I'm reporting on it at CNN, like covering this crisis. And meanwhile, I'm on the phone with the banks being like, can you please foreclose on my house? I can't get him out. And I either have to let it go and start this process, or I have to keep paying for it. And I did it for as long as I could. And finally, had to stop paying and negotiate deals. But he, my ex did eventually leave, but that house now is worth, I think it last sold for $375,000. It's an 800 square foot house bungalow in, it's a kind of a booming part of Denver now, but I have a 3,000 square foot brick home in a historic district that is on the National Register of Historic Places. And Arthur Herzog, who wrote God Bless the Child with Billie Holiday, used to live in, and the house here is not worth anywhere near what the house in Denver is, So I learned a lot in doing that. And I learned a lot about naivete and stupidity and being able to look at myself and take responsibility. I blame nobody for any of this. You make your choices and then you live with them and learn to reflect and figure out where you could have been smarter. Although, I teach at Michigan State, so I talk to a lot of my young women about, okay, how do we be financially independent? How do you make sure you take care of yourself? How do you love a partner and try to find, be equal with a partner and not let yourself get taken, advantage of, especially if you're involved but don't have, legal, papers, whether that's marriage or something else that keeps you together. Just how do you take care of yourself and not feel not be scared that somebody's not going to want you or going to go away. And so you don't stand up for yourself because you don't think you deserve any better.
Obviously that first house really taught you, well, it's made you who you are, but how then scared were you to embark on this reno? I mean,
it's a really good thing that apparently I just don't think like that, I'm just like, sure, we should do this now, right? Like opportunities come and I do it. Like partial lobotomy happens and I'm like, sure, this next adventure will be, should be. But I mean, it was scary, but also it was important to Carl, my husband, that he wanted to put down roots somewhere, which was really unexpected to me. I didn't think that was important to him. And so as we were finishing up that program and he was expressing that and that he had really fallen in love with Detroit, it was one of those moments where I'd always gone where the job was. I was always the priority for myself, because my career was always the most important thing. Mimi, my house is in West Village. And now that I, had this great husband who was a partner to me, that I needed to be a partner to him. So even though I had an offer to be an editor of a paper in Oakland, we skipped that and decided to move to Detroit, even though I wasn't certain, and do this house because it was really important to him. I thought I was either going to go to Oakland or I'd taken the Foreign Service exam and passed and was like, okay, I'm ready to go on for a life of international travel and foreign service. And my husband didn't want that. So we decided we would do, we're doing this. And I'm quite, in the end, like 7 years later, I'm glad it's the choice we made. I'm very happy here.
Good. That's awesome. So some folks love naming their pets. Some name their cars. You know where I'm going with this. You named the house. Tell us about Matilda, how that came about.
So the house is named Matilda. My husband named it Matilda after the Tom Waits song, Waltzing Matilda. He just felt like she was this, like in the song, this grand old dame that had seen better days, but was still there, and the beauty was there. You just had to look. And so Matilda was born, and she's pretty amazing. So he said when we bought it for $35,000, and it did not have plumbing, heat, or electricity. The south wall was also collapsing, so we had to rebuild the entire south wall. Things I did not expect. We wound up having to put a new roof on it, even though we thought the roof was going to be okay. We ended up putting a new roof on it. And when we were doing that, we discovered a lot of trusses had to be replaced, and dentals, if you're familiar with dentals in architecture, they're the decorative white boxes that basically go around the house and under your eaves on a lot of historic properties. They literally are just cedar boxes painted. Those things are really expensive, and I had to put in 99 of them. So I was not expecting decorative cedar boxes to be part of this renovation. So we thought naively, I was like, okay, my husband had 401k. I had some. We thought we'd cash that out, and it would give us about $150,000, right? So that, again, for this city, that is coming with resources, right? We could cash out because my husband had been thoughtful and saved, and he had that. We thought that would be enough to do this project. And we quickly learned that it wasn't even enough to do phase one. Like once we, really got into it, because all the windows, I think we have, I used to know this number off the top of my head, but I think there's something like 32 windows. And, at about $1,000 a window, because again, we're in a historic district and we bought in a historic district. We knew it going in, so I have no problem having to adhere to historic district requirements, but it's about $1,000 a window to replace them. And we had to replace, them because most of our windows were missing. So it wasn't like, oh, I just want something newer, prettier. It was like, well, there's mostly holes in the house. We are going to have to put some windows in. That's expensive. Like everything was plaster and everything, all the service had been taken out. So we had to go and put in all the plumbing and electrical, which meant, do you spend the money to try to weave it in behind the existing plaster, or do you take it down to studs and start over? And we made the decision to take it down to studs and start over, because then at least we could get air conditioning in there. We could get everything, everything in the walls would be safe, would be secure and new. And that turns out to be really expensive. So we spent a lot of money on this house, and most of it is all in the walls. Like if you come into our home, we have a very nice home. I don't, there's no two ways about that, but it's not all in high-end finishes, marble countertops and, fancy things. It's just that when you have to buy everything, you go broke buying light fixtures, at $100 or $200 a pop, or needing closet doors and, doors. And we got a lot of stuff off of salvage and out of, architectural salvage stores. but it adds up, HVAC, plumbing, all of it. So, it became a thing where we very quickly realized we didn't have enough resources and we were going to have to figure that out. And in Detroit, nobody would write us a mortgage, right? Like, and I don't blame any of the banks for that. How do you write a mortgage on a house that even when it's done is going to be worth less than what it is going to cost to fix it up, right? So, this was 2012, 2013, house values in this neighborhood. Again, I'm in the West Village, which is now one of the most desirable neighborhoods in Detroit. Houses now sell here for like 400 to 500,000. We're adjacent to Indian Village, but at the time nobody would give us a loan, so I had to figure it out, and that meant my parents had just gotten divorced. So we were going through that, and my brother and I had to sell the business at auction, and my dad loaned me the little bit. So, for what a man's life for 30 years of work was, worth about $85,000. That's what he came away with. And my dad loaned that to me for a year, interest free. So again, like, huge resource other people wouldn't have, but not trust fund that just like, I just got money. Like, if I didn't pay my father back, my father, who was living in an unheated trailer at the time in Montana, didn't live, right? And the only reason we have access to that resource is because something so tragic like my parents divorcing had to happen to make him liquid. So we did that. I figured out how to get loans from SoFi and other like consumer lending places that have godforsaken, interest rates and credit cards. Like, the capital stack I put together was intense and highly leveraged. But you get to a point where you're like, if you're in for a penny, you're in for a pound, right? At what point do you turn around? And maybe we could have sold it half done and been like, wow, that was stupid. We got in over our heads. But in 2012, 2013, that there were people who were buying, but they weren't necessarily seeing, like, there wasn't a huge market for it. So we just kept pressing along. And what it meant was like, we were finally able, like, when we finally finished the house, we found one bank who said, okay, if you do all the work and you come to us, then we'll look at doing a mortgage so that you could, basically, they would write a mortgage on our property and give us the cash so we could pay our contractors and people. So we did as much as we could ourselves, which honestly, when you're going down to studs and having to do that kind of technical work, like, I don't do plumbing and electrical because the same reason I don't work on the brakes on my car, right? If I work on my brakes and I mess it up, I can't stop, and that's real bad. If I do my own plumbing and I mess it up and I flood out the walls, that's real bad. I'll work on things on cars that make it go, because the worst thing that happens is it does not go, right? It's fine. So we did what we could and tried to be frugal, but it was just an expensive project. When we got to the end, we did find that bank was willing to write us a mortgage at that point, and we were able to pay our contractors and pay back my father and pay back the IRS, because I forgot to save it. When you cash out your 401k, don't forget to save the 10% penalty, because they will come for that. And so we had to pay off the debt we owed the IRS, and we're still paying off then the debt on the consumer finance loans. And I think I've finished paying off the last credit card debt. So it's, so the work is done, but we're still paying for it. And I know some people find it very crass to talk about the finances and talk about the money, but I do it very purposefully and always have, because I feel like too many people can come into situations and all they've heard is that houses in Detroit are $1 and it's so cheap and anybody can do it. And there's very little information out there about what the actual costs are to be able to benchmark and ballpark, right? Other people can do it differently. Maybe they can buy a cheaper version of a house, or they can do more of the work themselves, or it's not that everything is going to be the exact same price point as mine, but I like to give people the tools to understand, what that larger picture looks like, so that there's more information from hopefully more success, so people can have more success when they come in and don't get in over their heads. I was lucky that I could figure out a way to make it work. So Mimi, the total cost to renovate was $400,000. So, and that is the number I give everybody that I've learned, it's not just me, but talking to some other people, it's about $100 a square foot. If you're doing basically a gut reno, if you're doing just, some interior beautification things, that's different. But if you're talking about a gut reno where you actually have to put in systems, you should probably be looking at about $100 a square foot, and that will ballpark you in at probably where you'll end up. We tried to phase it, but one of the things we learned is once you have the walls opened, you kind of have to do everything at that time, because what are you going to do? Like, pay to have them reopened later and spend twice the cost to get the, it just doesn't make sense. So you wind up just trying to figure everything out. So, the house is basically done. It still needs painted. It's 5 years on, and Carl and I are still painting, because it turns out I really don't like to paint. But I'm not going to pay somebody to paint, because like, that is a skill I have and I can do. And so we're just slowly doing those kinds of things in the house.
We talk about the salvage things, and the old banister that was on the stairwell, and they weren't able to save that, but they were able to save a piece, and then that's going to go up to the attic steps, and the doors that you found, these gorgeous doors in a church that was just going to be, the wrecking ball was going to take it, and take whatever you could, and you guys did. You didn't just go out and I'll take that, and that. I mean, and that it's history of Detroit in your home too, and that's really important. So Al, Christian, and Gary,
yep,
were your contractors. First of all, how do you think you got so lucky? It's like divine intervention almost. I mean, those guys, they love that house as much, if not more originally than you and your husband. How'd you get so lucky to get them?
I don't know. So Cal and Christian Garfield are a father and son contracting duo here in Detroit. So Cal was a 20-year city building inspector. His son Christian had moved to Boston to go do finance, hated it, and came home, and he and his dad decided to start a renovation company together. And I think our house was like their first or second property they'd worked on together. So I think we got lucky in that they were starting their business, and they liked us and we liked them. And it was, we just had a good rapport. I mean, Cal and I talked books he'd be there working and we're talking books, and Christian felt like my brother. So we're harassing each other like brother and sister, and just like, they were reliable and wonderful and good humans. And I've recommended them to everybody, because especially like my friends with children are like, I would come home from work and there's Cal sitting on the couch reading books to my children, like waiting for me to have a meeting. And, I don't know how we got lucky, but I do say that I think growing up in the contracting and construction world, I will, you'll have to forgive the vulgarity, but my father's advice to me was, don't be an asshole, right? Like, don't be an asshole. And so like treating them with respect, and not like they're responsible for financing my dreams. And, like everything I saw in my childhood, the way my mother and my father were treated by customers, I made sure Carl and I would never going to be that way. We were going to be good partners. It was going to be a good marriage. And so, I almost didn't hire Cal because I thought he couldn't do I come from more of a Western, like gruff coveralls kind of place. And here comes Cal for our first meeting in like Dockers and loafers and like a button down shirt. And I was like, can he do the work? Right? Like total stereotype. It was terrible. And so we joke about that now. He was like, are you sure I can wear my button down? What's up, Cal?
So you're still in touch with them?
Yeah, we usually get together every year at the holidays, and they have keys to our house, so they keep tools in our basement, so that if they're doing work on this side of town and need something, they can just pop in and grab stuff.
Oh, that's awesome. That is awesome. So let's see, it's about 10 of. I want you to talk a little bit about the Shady Ladies Literary Society that you started in 2017, which showcases up and coming authors. Why did you start that group?
So it came out of actually writing this book and seeing how challenging it was for first-time authors to connect with audiences. And realized it wasn't just me, that almost every other writer I was talking to, your agent told you that your publisher wasn't probably going to do much to promote your book, and you heard that, but you kind of assumed that meant a baseline. You didn't realize like it was going to be in the sub basement. Like your publisher almost does nothing to promote your book unless you happen to be that lightning in a bottle, like Tara Westover, who I brought to Detroit to be a Shady Lady. Like she was lightning in a bottle, and of course tons of resources behind supporting Educated, which is great. But so many great books come and go without people being able to connect with them, because there's no marketing or support dollars behind it. And I thought, well, what if we could do something here in Detroit that connected first-time women authors? And we say female, we always say just anybody who identifies as a woman. Like, we're, it's completely open, trans, non-binary, all of that. Men are, welcome in our spaces, but we only promote women and people who identify as women writers. What if we could bring them to Detroit and do something spectacular where people want to come? So we do a dinner in a unique location. We've been in graveyards. We've been in historic churches in that were on the Underground Railroad. So we have this dinner and this presentation, the idea of like trying to build connections with writers that can sustain them over their careers, and that when they're second guessing their second book and whether they're any good, maybe they remember that group in Detroit that was so supportive and loved them and came out for that. But at the same time, being able to show writers and publishers a different way of thinking about Detroit. Because when I wrote my book, one of the questions I always got was, why would anybody read a book about Detroit? Who cares about Detroit? And also, can anybody in Detroit read? And I was like, no, none of us can read. We can barely get down the street because we can't read street signs. But like, it was very denigrating the way Detroit was treated. And I thought, well, what if we could slowly change perceptions about Detroit by doing this really cool event that writers suddenly start being able to come to, and publishers see as being, a premier kind of event to get their writers to. And so we've done it for 3 years. And like I said, we've had Elaine Castillo, who wrote America's Not the Heart, Tara Westover, who did Educated, Tomi Adeyemi, who did Children of Blood and Bone. So, I really focus on underrepresented, underheard voices. We were supposed to have SM Holtz, who wrote her book, Eden Mine, which I think is one of the best books to come out this year. She was supposed to be here in September, but with the pandemic, she couldn't. And also Chrissy Van Meter, who wrote Creatures, was supposed to be here in March. And so our entire season got canceled. But we're looking at how do we build this into a more national opportunity, because I'm getting a ton of requests from other cities about how do we bring Shady Ladies there? How do I be a Shady Lady? And it's, again, like, I'm as interested in the connection with the author and their story as I am about the book. I find that I'm not always hugely interested in doing book recommendations because everybody's tastes are so different, but I'm very interested in how the power of literature and the power of story to bring us together across boundaries that might keep us apart in other ways. Like, I know that I have conservative and liberal women who are members of Shady Ladies, and we have these great conversations and try to make it a really great, welcoming space.
Are you going to try to do something virtually, do you think, or?
So when the pandemic first hit, I was doing weekly Zoom events. So in addition to Shady Ladies, I also have a part of it that we call Chemistry Club that pairs women scientists and bartenders. So make a good cocktail based on the science and then learn about science because, I think it's particularly interesting. And so once a week I was doing sort of a science and social science event on Zoom. So we had Betsy Stevenson, who used to be one of the, lead economists for the Department of Labor, came on to talk the day the stimulus was passed. I had her on. We had people come on talking about how the pandemic was going to affect children and the science behind that. And then I was doing daily interviews with authors on Instagram. And that burned me out because I teach full time and I write basically full time for the New York Times. So I kind of pulled back and I'm in this space right now where I'm thinking about how can I shift the model to be digital, have maybe some in-person, do some digital, and have it be something that I can support, because I was losing money on this. So it's amazing what it costs to bring somebody like that in and do this kind of an event, because I'd have the plane ticket and the hotel costs and the dinner costs. And even when I sold a ticket, the honest truth of the matter is a ticket should have cost $250, but I can't charge $250 for a literary event, right? That feels disgusting to me. But so what it meant was that I charged $100 for the ticket and I wound up eating the difference personally. So I was like, I can't, and that's part of building a business, right? There's always the first few years where you take a loss in building a business as you're developing it. It's like, I can't keep doing that. So I'm at that phase right now that says, how do I think about what it could be in a way that could be economically viable, and culturally interesting and relevant. Like, I'm just figuring all those things out. I probably just need somebody else who's better with money than me to not be in charge of that party ever. How do we find out about you? So I have a website. It's called ShadyLadiesLiterarySociety.com, and we'll post events there. There hasn't been one in a while, but when we start again, you can find out about it. We're also Shady Ladies Lit, L-I-T, on Instagram. I can put that
I do, you know, this pandemic has done a lot of harm, but I think in a lot of ways it's really expanded thought processes, and I hate to say out of the box thinking, but you know, I mean, it really has upended what we can do, and pivot has also become a word that seems to be the word this year. So libraries as well have had to, you know, they've been closed, and that is typically never done. Libraries are always there.
Yep.
And so they've been trying to figure out not only virtual programming, but then phasing in how people can come back in. And you know, when you work at a library and you get the book delivery from the UPS guy, you can't wait to open that box, and you're like, oh my gosh, what came in? Oh my gosh, we got the new blah, blah, blah book. Or you stand there and you read every children's book because they're just so wonderful. And, you know, we're missing that, you know, I'm missing and sharing with patrons what great new books have come in. And you know, libraries for me, I was not a reader as a child. I was in the worst reading group. It was terrible. And for me to become a librarian was the most ironic thing, I think. Anyway, I'm glad I did. But so I know what libraries mean to me growing up. What do libraries mean to you, Amy?
Well, I mean, libraries are incredibly important to me, and are incredibly important to my childhood. So, you know, growing up where I did, there wasn't, as you know, I've said, there wasn't a lot of opportunity for me. And my parents didn't have a lot of money. So for Christmas one year, my mother got me a library card and promised that, you know, every Saturday we could go to the library and I could get books. So that became the library was my window into the wider world. And when I'd sort of read through the children's section, the librarian there started ordering books in from Denver. But like that librarian was pivotal in my life to really, you know, helping me see something that I couldn't see for myself. I could see that there could be a bigger life, even if I didn't know how to get there. That was the library. Sorry. I do it every time. Every time somebody asks me about libraries, I cry, and I'm like, okay, so this is going to be the time I don't cry. But it's not. So like, libraries are hugely important to me. It's why anytime I get an opportunity to talk to, you know, librarians or a group of, you know, with a library, I'll always do it. Because that woman, you know, I don't know that she would even remember who I am. It was this great library, basically 2 rooms, and one was the map room, and it was an old stone house. And so in the summer in Fruita, when it would get to like 105 degrees out, and you could, you know, bake on the pavement, and your legs would stick to the seats in my dad's old truck. Like, I could go hide in the library, and it would be so cool. And I could just read, and it was okay to do that. And I could take books because I didn't have much else, and I could take them home, and I could climb up in the tree and read them. And like, there would always be some new world.
Well, it really helped you through, you know, your childhood. And I bet that she does remember you. I bet the librarian does remember you, because I think that being a librarian, I remember a lot of the little kids who then, when they come back, and it doesn't seem like it could be 20 years, and they're standing in front of me saying, I just graduated with my master's degree. And I'm like, what? Wait.
That's not possible.
I know, right? But, you know, if possible, maybe you should try to find her and just let her know. You know,
I don't even know her name. So the library is now, I'm so disappointed. They built a new, bigger, better library. So that's good. I do appreciate that. But they took the library out of the stone house, and now that's the Chamber of Commerce. And I've been into the new library, and I'm sure that it's incredibly special to some other little girl there right now. But for me, I'm like, I want my library back.
Right.
That one.
And nobody can take those memories from you. Absolutely. No. Absolutely.
So, yeah. I always remember when we moved to Denver, I had a library book out and it was called The Girl with the Silver Eyes. And I had to return it before I finished it. And I still think about that book and think I should go try to check that out someday and see how it finally ended. Because I never did get to read the end of The Girl with the Silver Eyes.
It might even be digital now. You might be
Yeah,
able to download it as an ebook. Or listen to it as an audiobook when you're taking your dog out to Belle Isle for a walk. Or...
That's true. That's true. I love a good audiobook and podcast.
Does anybody have questions? If you do, unmute or throw it in the chat. I have more, but they're basic questions, you know. Do you have a ritual when you write? I mean, is it, you're now up in your attic in kind of like your office. Is that where you typically write?
This is, let's see, I can take my, I'll take my cam down and I'll see if I can turn it. So this is the attic of the house.
Nice.
So it's a little like writing slash, you know, extra bedroom. I don't know if you can see the cat. I've got a cat over there, but this is my little writing space and workspace. I tend to, I have serious writer's block. I've had writer's block since I wrote the book. So I know I should be working on the next project, but I can't quite decide on when it's going to be. You know, yeah. So I wish I had a ritual. I keep trying to like start with morning pages and like do the thing where you sit down and you write your 1,000 words or whatever every morning, come hell or high water, and invariably that doesn't happen. You know, it's been good. I'm writing for the New York Times again, so that has been helpful. Just like exercising that muscle, because I do remind my students that writing is a muscle, and the more you do it, the less scary it is. But when you haven't done it for a while, for me at least, it's like really overwhelming to start again and like not have. I had a mentor who described it as like writing brain and editor brain, and when you haven't exercised writing brain, all it does is editor brain just sits there and like yells at writing brain and is like, you suck, you're terrible, why could you write that word? And poor writer brain is just like, I'm not going to say anything because I'm mean. And like, how do you create time for like writer brain to get its time to do its thing, set it aside, and then let editor brain come in? And I'm just in like all editor brain right now. So I gotta find a time and space for writer brain.
Well, and I mean, working full-time, you know, at MSU and writing for the New York Times. And as you said, I mean, writing for the New York Times is more linear, a different writing style than writing a book. And, you know, I guess to write another book, you know, you have to think about what's going on in your life too, and how things are progressing. So. And what I like takes reporting, and so I need the time to be able to go and actually do some of that reporting. And I think the next book is probably, the next nonfiction book at least, is probably something to do with set in the American West. I mean, what I'm interested in is the gentrification of the American West. So it's what I know, it's where I'm from, and it's not a conversation that's had very frequently. You know, what we call gentrification out there, here would be called boutiquing in the West. We're just sort of the boutiquing of rural America and the American West. That's interesting. I think you got something there. So you obviously have a great deal of passion and you write with a lot of emotion. Do you think someone could be a writer if they didn't feel emotions strongly, like a real connection?
I think so. I think that some people are emotional writers and some people are much more cerebral writers. And you know, I have a really good friend, Donovan, who is a Michigan-based writer, and he is just a very cerebral writer. And I wouldn't ever call Donovan passionate in an like effusive, emotional kind of way, but he is deeply committed to his work and being a robust thinker. And so he and I write very different kinds of things, but I think there's room for a lot of different kinds of writers and kinds of material. I don't understand half of what he writes, but I know that it's very good.
One last question. What do you hope your readers take away from your book?
I hope that they take away a different thought, some different ideas of what Detroit is or what Detroit could be, see it more roundly, as opposed to just this place that has sort of been the butt of so many jokes, that it's a place where people live their lives and they love, and there's a beautiful community here, and that they think more seriously or thoughtfully about intentional community and what it takes to build that wherever they're at.
Beautiful. Very well said. Anybody else have comments? Some really nice comments in the chat.
You're welcome, everyone.
And
thank you for
thanks
having
so
me.
much for sharing that story about what libraries mean to you. I know that that's, for all of us, we probably have something, along those lines. Otherwise, we wouldn't be in this business, I don't think. So, but thanks so much for your time. Let's see. Oh, Pam says, can't wait to read this. Went to Wayne State and love
Nice.
Love what I see happening. Awesome.
Nice.
Yeah, well, thanks so much, Amy. Thanks for your time. And folks, before I opened up to everybody, this is our last, maybe we'll call it chapter 5 of our virtual annual meeting. And I had asked Amy to give me 3 numbers, because we have a Barnes & Noble gift card, a Target gift card, and then Amy's book that we are giving away today. So she gave me the numbers 2. So Mimi, you get a, where am I at? Barnes & Noble gift card for $25. And Christian, you get a Target gift card. I'm just writing these down, otherwise I will forget. And trying to see who was and Pam, you are the book winner. So, and Amy has the book there. She'll sign it, and I will send Amy the address where to send it to you, Pam. And can you spend it on Starbucks? So anyway, thanks so much, you guys. Have a great holiday. Hard to believe Thanksgiving is upon us, and then right around the corner is, the Christmas holiday time. And so one last thing for my people, next Tuesday we'll have a Zoom, more casual Zoom again. And I will see you then at 10. I'll send a weekly update with the Zoom link at the end of the week too. So, but thanks, Amy. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
And thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.
It was wonderful to meet you all. Thank you.